Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, today we're going to talk about a very, very important leadership core competency. Now, let me just say in the outset, those of you who listen regularly know this topic, these words, that phrase, leadership core competency. There are many competencies that each of us as leaders need to bring to our workplace, need to bring to our practice of leadership that could be different for different people, different times, different circumstances, different situations. There are some, though, that are central, that are core. And let's just call them that, core leadership competencies. Certainly communication would be an example of something that jumps off the page at you. Judgment, decision-making, these skills, well developed in a leader, are essential to your leadership success and the success of any enterprise. Well, today we're going to talk about another one that I do think is absolutely essential for every leader. Now, there's a big word, every leader. Okay, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about trust. For a leader, any leader, to be effective, they need to establish trust. How does one go about doing that? Well, my simple answer, just like my answer about leadership, simple to say, oftentimes hard to do. Here we go. Trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. That's it. Trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. So in this episode, we're going to talk about trust and how people have or have not earned that through their trustworthy behavior, or in the case of today's episode, two absolutely critical components of our lives, I think, in their exhibition of trust unworthiness. So here we go. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the U.S. Congress. I've done episodes on the Congress of the United States before, in particular, the House of Representatives and the institutional leadership failures that we've unfortunately had to witness for some years now. Again, I've spoken about this in a previous episode, but today I'm going to revisit it from this point of view of trust and trustworthiness, and I'm going to talk about a continued and ongoing failure in establishing trust. Secondly, I'm going to talk about another institutional leadership failure, again, that I've spoken about in previous episodes, and that is the Boeing Aircraft Corporation, who continues down a path that heaven knows none of us wants them to travel. It's an iconic company, a wonderful company that for years has been the world leader in aviation and in building the finest and best aircraft in the world. And now, with some unfortunate regularity, they have lost their way. Not the company, not the people, but unfortunately the leadership. And what that leadership does is creates a culture that becomes acceptable not to be trustworthy. So that's really quite a sad story as well. So we're going to talk about both of these in the context of facts. I want to emphasize not in the context of politics, but in leadership core competency. What are the leaders doing? And do this by factual presentation. Okay, so here we go. Let's begin. Right from the beginning, as I said, what are we talking about? This absolutely critical leadership core competency, trust. And how do we define it? Trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. Okay. Comes from the root of this podcast, which is to say leadership. And again, as I've said repeatedly, I think it bears saying again right now, what about leadership? Leadership is all about doing the right thing. And certainly, absolutely embedded in that is the establishment of trust with those you serve. Okay, so here we go. Let's go to the two examples. What I'm going to do is just read some pieces from the public press so that you all can see what it is I'm talking about. And I will make some points about why it is so critical to be trustworthy. Okay, here we go. First, let's talk about the U.S. Congress. Well, there would be certainly a myriad of examples, unfortunately. And again, not to be political, but to be factual. I'm going to use the congressman from the 1st Congressional District in Virginia. That's the district where I live. The congressman I've had several conversations with directly, personally. So this comes not as new news, unfortunately, to him, but it may be to you. Because what people say and what people do should be linked. I've said this before. For leadership to be effective, it must be consistent. If I say something, I need to do that something, or to the best of my ability, that something, whatever it is. Okay? So let's go to my congressman. Here's a letter which I received back on the 3rd of May. This is 2024, and it's titled Friend. Quote, "Our veterans deserve our unwavering support as they transition back to civilian life. And whether it's accessing health care, employment, or educational opportunities, I'm proud," this is the congressman, "I'm proud to fight for the nearly 800,000 veterans who call Virginia home." Well, that's a pretty great statement. That's a pretty good opener from a letter to a constituent, don't you think? Sounds great. The talk is good. How does he end the letter? I'll jump to the last sentence in this letter. Congressman says this, "Please know that I remain committed to ensuring our veterans have the support they deserve and the most efficient delivery of benefits possible." Wow, another high note. In strong, says that not only do I care about you, but I'm going to do everything I can for you, right? I mean, if I sort of summarize that, I have unwavering support, so he says. And he's committed to ensuring that the veterans have the support they deserve. Okay, so that's the letter. That's the opener. So what's the follow-on? So what happens? And who is this congressman, right? Well, congressman from the 1st Congressional District in Virginia is the vice chair of the Committee on Armed Services. It's one of those holy cow moments, I know. So he's in leadership, not only in the Congress of the United States as a congressman, but on the very committee that would take care of America's proud veterans. He's the vice chair of the Committee on the Armed Forces. Okay. So what do they do? This person who's so committed to veterans, right? Who should earn our trust. They do that again by trustworthy behavior. Let's look at it. The National Defense Authorization Act, that's the NDAA, for fiscal year 21. This is the House of Representatives Bill 6395, presented to the President, and includes a provision to repeal. That's not a good word, folks. To repeal the administration of TRICARE plans for dental, for hearing, and for vision for veterans. The provision being repealed was originally included in the John McCain National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 and would have become effective in 2022. So, what did this leader who says they care deeply about veterans and supporting them, what did he do? Not what he said, what did he do? Here we go, another quote. Congressional Armed Services Committees and related legislation are not committees or issues closely monitored, but the above repeal may have come as a surprise to those who do. So they're saying, well, we're perhaps more interested in guns and ammo than we are the veteran that served and their health care. Okay, but what about if you were one of those veterans that did serve, that wore a uniform in the service of our country? Well, prior to the conference committee, a Senate amendment would have delayed the implementation from January 2022 to January 2023. While the House bill, this is the House of Representatives where the congressman from the 1st Congressional District represents its constituents, included no similar provision. The blanket repeal was raised and included in and during the conference committee. Now what happens is that's sort of a lot of gobbledygook, but in English, folks, what that means is it never made it out of committee. It died in committee. It never got a vote. Now this is the person who says they're going to take care of veterans, that they're going to do everything possible for veterans, and then says, but to repeal important veteran benefits by cutting vision, hearing, and dental care from veterans. And by the way, he also was happy to approve that to be eliminated for Medicare recipients as well. So a very large population of seniors. Does that get our trust? When he says, I care about you deeply, and then votes to repeal a veteran benefit. Well, folks, trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. This action and repeated action is not trustworthy. It's dishonest. It is a failure of leadership. Okay, let's go on to Boeing. Talk about that for a minute. Again, I've done episodes on Boeing in the past about the leadership failures, not the failure of the many valued and trusted employees at Boeing, the people that historically have built this incredible series of aircraft. No, it's more about, unfortunately, leadership who has taken another path, a path to shortcut, a path to remove themselves from the sites of production and to be literally a long distance away, and yet think they're running the company. Okay. Well, what's happened is a number of things. Let me go first to a piece from Aviation Week. Again, a very trusted publication talking about the Boeing 787. That's the Boeing Dreamliner. It's made in Charleston, South Carolina, a non-union facility. Says that Boeing must inspect the undelivered and in-production 787s to ensure some steps in the aircraft's assembly were done correctly after learning that required tests to validate the work were recorded as complete, but never completed. Think about that. They wanted to validate the work as complete, but the work was never completed. It was an employee in the South Carolina 787 final assembly facility that said, quote, saw what happened to be an irregularity in a required conformance test in wing body join, joining the wing and the fuselage, the body of the airplane. Scott Stoker, 787 vice president and general manager, said in an April 29 email to employees that revealed this issue. The employee told his manager, who alerted executive leadership, that's in quotes, the email said. Boeing quickly reviewed the matter and determined several people had been violating company policies by not performing a required test, but recording the work as having been completed. So, a little bit of pass the buck, but the point is that leadership had to be told, because they were unaware, that critical functions were being validated as complete, when in fact they were not even completed. Okay, so let's go more currently. What happens then? This is an ongoing story again. Well, Michael Bruno, also from Aviation Week, did a recent piece, May 15th, 2024. I'll read from the piece. U.S. prosecutors have decided Boeing violated the terms of a January 2021 deferred prosecution agreement over the dual 737 MAX crashes that killed 346 people, according to a May 14th notification. So I've just talked to you about Dreamliner problems in Charleston. Now we're going to talk about 737 problems out in the state of Washington. The Justice Department said Boeing breached obligations under the agreement, namely failing to design and enforce a compliance program to ward off future violations of U.S. fraud laws. Department officials will host a meeting with victim representatives May 31 in Washington. Boeing has until June 13th to respond to the decision. It was not immediately clear what the next steps would be following the new finding. Ostensibly, justice could bring one or more criminal charges against the leading U.S. aircraft manufacturer and large defense prime contractor, or work out further remediation through an extension of the agreement. The latest finding came after Justice considered the implications of the January 5 737-9 door plug incident on board an Alaska Airlines flight, and the subsequent spotlighting of manufacturing problems at Boeing and key aerostructures provided by Spirit Aerosystems. I'll continue reading this piece here, but let me just point out that I highlighted in the early podcast about Spirit Aerosystems and what has happened from a leadership point of view, because that's what we're all about, leadership. Well, unfortunately, Boeing has become largely an assembler and not a manufacturer. So this company, Spirit Aerosystems, was providing components brought to a Boeing facility where then Boeing would assemble it, like the wing to the body of the airplane. Okay? The original deferred prosecution agreement expired on January 7th of 2024, and Justice had 6 months afterward to determine whether Boeing remained in agreement during that time. Well, the January 2021 deal worked out in the last few days of the Trump administration, was criticized by some observers as a sweetheart deal, in part because it included compensation that Boeing already planned to pay victim representatives and aircraft operators. Nonetheless, it entailed a total of $2.5 billion in the settlement. The company paid the U.S. a criminal penalty charge of $243.6 million. That's quite a lot less, isn't it? While a $500 million fund to compensate victims' families was opened in June of 21. The Justice Agreement also included $1.77 billion US dollars worth of compensation to MAX operators. Well, this article goes on and concludes this way. The SEC is reportedly investigating anew whether Boeing leader statements in the wake of the January 5th accident misled investors. The leaders misstating the truth. Meanwhile, the FAA has a deadline looming for a plan from Boeing to address systemic quality control issues in its airliner manufacturing. And the aviation regulator is reportedly opening a new probe about the 787 Dreamliner manufacturing I spoke about earlier, after Boeing in April acknowledged that workers may have falsified test records. Okay, so here we have two examples. One from congressional leadership telling you that they care about you deeply, and in fact doing quite the opposite. A person that argues that they're for veterans and supporting veterans and would do anything necessary for veterans, then in fact votes against veterans and votes to eliminate veteran benefits. In the example I gave, dental, hearing, and vision care. So what you say and what you do determines your trustworthiness. Are you trustworthy? Trust is based upon trustworthiness. I think in that example it's quite clear. Sounds good, talks good, at the end of the day, votes against veterans. That person can't win your vote. Leadership's about doing the right thing. If you're a veteran, if you're a retiree, if you're on Medicare, if you're on TRICARE, you can't vote. You shouldn't vote for someone who says one thing and does another. Trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. Next, the case of Boeing. Similarly, talking a good game, wanting to really convince the public and certainly the Department of Justice to avoid further litigation that they're going to be doing the right thing, and then employees stepping up in multiple places. Examples I gave both in the state of Washington and the state of South Carolina. The case of the Dreamliner and the Boeing 737, both troubled programs, to say, no, we are not operating in a trustworthy behavior, but we want the public to trust us. So, institutional leadership failures on a corporate level and on a congressional level. So, folks, this issue of trust is so critical, so important. It's so essential to effective leadership. Trust is based upon trustworthy behavior. Please never forget that. Please practice it. All right. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your listening. Thank you for tuning in. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.